One second. Okay, looks like I might have gotten us live on Instagram as well this time. Fingers crossed. So, welcome to Notable Approvals. I am Attorney Amanda Shaffer. I'm very excited for our case today. I have been waiting over a year and a half to talk about this case, actually, because over a year and a half ago is when we finished the individual hearing or the trial for the case. It's a very interesting case. The client is a native and citizen of Russia and Moldova, so he had to be granted asylum from both countries because if he didn't show he couldn't go back to Russia, for example, but he showed that he couldn't go back to Moldova, then they could say, well, go to Russia. So you had to show both countries when you're a native and citizen, or when you're a citizen of both countries. Or if you're a citizen of more than two countries, you have to show for each and every single one. But what is even more interesting about this case is that the lawyer for my client before he hired me ended up being convicted in a gigantic asylum fraud ring. A lot of Russian clients were mixed up in that. So his case was ongoing while the lawyer was indicted, went through trial. And what happens is the FBI or the prosecutor, DA, well, the attorney general, because it's federal, will go to the lawyer's office and take all the files, and then they will go through every single one to see, is there other people here? Hi, Gonzalez. Thanks for joining us. Is there anyone here in this pile who might be part of the fraud? And I've talked about other cases where I've dealt with clients who had the same issue with a prior attorney, and it can be a real problem for people, even if you have a completely legitimate claim. For this client, the biggest issue came down to background checks because DHS didn't have his file. They couldn't clear his background checks. So even though we did the hearing, everything seemed good. We felt good. We had to wait for the checks to clear. So I'll talk a little bit more about that stuff. But let's get into the case. So a client is a native and citizen of Moldova and Russia, as I said, living in Queens. He had a lot of issues as a child growing up in Moldova as a Russian-speaking person or as Russian ethnicity. And this was especially true after the fall of the USSR. In grade school, one day he was speaking Russian to a friend, and then he was ostracized for it. And his mother was actually called in by the principal and said that she was not raising him properly. And this harassment kind of continued throughout his school age. After he graduated college, he decided, I'm going to move to Russia because, he was a dual citizen and kind of tired of the discrimination. But unfortunately, it turned out that it was not any better for him in Russia. In Russia, they didn't like Moldovans, and he was a Moldovan. So he continued to face discrimination. He started working, and he ended up meeting his ex-wife now, his first wife, in 2009, and she was Russian, and she made him feel like he finally had a home, that he finally wasn't an outsider. And they did have a child together, but unfortunately, the marriage didn't work out because she cheated on him, and they divorced in 2011. And the divorce was very difficult for the client. It put him into a severe depression. One of his coworkers at work noticed that he seemed to be in this depression. He seemed to be different than, what they've known of him the last couple of years. And he said, why don't you come along with me to my church? He was a Jehovah's Witness, and said, just come see. I know you're really, down, and he didn't really have anyone. So clients that thought to himself, well, he knew Jehovah's Witnesses didn't have the greatest reputation in the world, but because they were seen as like separatists and extremists in Russia. But he didn't know too much about it. So he went and didn't think much of it and kind of continued to go about his business, and, he would see the coworker, but not really engage. And then his ex-wife got remarried. And not only did she get remarried, she then tried to cut him out of his daughter's life. This really sent him off the deep end. Understandably, he was suicidal, and the same coworker essentially saved him from killing himself. He was planning to kill himself one night. He said goodbye to everybody at work, and his coworker, the same one that brought him to the Jehovah Witness meeting, noticed something was really wrong that day and said to him, you know, let's why don't you come with me again? So instead of him going home and doing something that you can't come back from, he ended up going with his friend again to Kingdom Hall, which is what the Jehovah Witnesses call their place of worship. And he said when he got to Kingdom Hall, he noticed, oh, I'm sorry, I did say the first time he went. The first time he didn't go. He shook it off and was like, nah, I'm not going to go. This time, at his very bottom, he said, okay. So he goes to Kingdom Hall and he notices something very different than his church that he had. I think he was a Christian Orthodox before. There was no icons or candles. And he said it was the first time in his life he understood the Bible passage that I think they called them elders, or the fathers or the priests. I'm sorry, I'm Jewish myself. I don't know exact terms for every religion, but the person leading the Bible passage, he was able to understand it. And a year later, he continued to go every Sunday, really started to get involved. He basically, this religion saved him, gave him a purpose, gave him something to look forward for. So about a year later, he had himself baptized and committed to the faith. And then he started field service, which is essentially what most of us would know as missionary work. And he did this in Russia. And this is where they would go out, and I'm sure you've seen it. They would have like a board, one of those boards you have in school, and pamphlets, and would stand at a table, and as people walked by, ask them if they were interested, or they'd go door to door knocking and hand out, ask them if they wanted to become a Jehovah's Witness. Or I'm sorry, I'm not exactly sure what they do, but I know essentially what it is. So he started to notice when they did the field work that people weren't very friendly. They didn't really like them. And it could get violent. So the first time out, his friend kind of warned him, but, someone got a little angry but backed off. The second time they went and did this, out of nowhere, his friend got punched in the face. And then when he tried to help his friend, he got kicked. And they started kind of beating them. And this was just over someone who just wasn't happy that they rang their doorbell. And he wanted to go to the hospital. So he said to his friend, why aren't we going to the hospital? And his friend said that it is illegal to be Jehovah Witness in Russia. So they're going to get in more trouble if they go to the hospital. So they couldn't do that. So they kind of just went home, and, they were hurting, but they healed, fortunately. And then another time he was out doing his field work. This is when they did have a stand up, and they were kind of people were just walking by. And I don't even know if they were soliciting anyone or just standing there letting people approach. Regardless, they were out in their field service and at the stand, and the police came and destroyed their stand. They just bashed it, threatened to arrest them if they didn't leave, even though they weren't actually bothering anyone. In 2014, his work transferred him back to Moldova. And Jehovah's Witnesses were also strongly disliked in Moldova, but he was determined to continue to practice his religion, this religion that, as I said, really did save him and helped him find new meaning for his life. In the summer of that year, there were 2 Orthodox Christians that attacked him and another brother. They They were screaming things out like the Jehovah's Witness they were gonna go to hell, um, that they're Satan, all these crazy things, and then things then escalated when my client spoke because he had a Russian accent, and as I said earlier, when he was younger, he knew that Moldovans didn't like Russian ethnics, or, those of Russian ethnicity. So, they started beating them, these guys. And a crowd actually gathered around him and his friend being beaten by these two men, and everyone just watched and no one did anything. Um, he continued to do his field work, work, and live his life, but they would have some violent bouts here and there. And then in March 2016, he actually got transferred back to Russia by his work. And unfortunately, when he got back to Russia, things were even worse for Jehovah's Witnesses at that time. In the fall of 2016, his entire congregation, his leader of his congregation was detained. And he came back a few weeks later, he looking like a different person, that he was ill. And then all he told the congregation was that he was leaving. He was going back to his home country. He wasn't originally from Moldova. And no one knew why, except that he was detained for like 3 weeks and they don't know what happened, but this guy was like, I'm out, basically. Then in April 2017, this is when their Kingdom Hall in St. Petersburg was raided by the police. They detained the entire church, everyone who was in there. They took their literature. Everyone was arrested and interrogated. And then they were released, but they were told, if you practice your religion again, we're going to arrest you. So this caused him to flee Russia in 2017, in April of 2017. So he goes back to Moldova. Again, he continues to practice religion as best he can. And he was attacked again for being a Jehovah's Witness. They were calling it Satan's religion again. They were just saying horrible things. He was punched in the head, and he fell. I'm not sure if he was punched in the head or the face. He fell and hit his head. And he said all he remembers the next thing was that he knows the police were called because they were standing over him, and they pulled him up and they threw him in the back of a police car. He saw them talking to his attackers for a few minutes, and then they just left. So then he thanked the police officer for saving his life, because this is when the crowd had formed. This was another time a crowd had formed and didn't do anything, I should say. And the police said, I didn't save you, or we didn't save you. We saved them. You and your friend attacked them. And he was like, my client was like, what? But that just showed you. He was like, oh, shoot, this isn't good. And then the police officer also made a comment that Jehovah's Witnesses are always causing problems. Then in 2017, we're in 2017. I'm sorry. So then after that incident where he was punched, fell, and hit his head, he went to the hospital for 10 days for a brain concussion. Right after this, he fled the country. And that is when he came to the US. And at that point, he was remarried, had a child. I think he was remarried and had a child. I'm sorry. I'm not. He is remarried now. I don't remember when they got remarried. So that's not that important to the story, to be honest. So, so he gets to the US, right? So he applies for asylum. He came in, thought I had that, but I guess I don't. Oh yeah, he came in 2017. He came right here. Whew. He did apply within a year. That wasn't an issue. And on his application was his wife and his daughter that he had with this wife. Now, he does have another daughter, as I mentioned. That was with his first wife, and they actually fled to the US too. And the the wife filed for asylum and the daughter was on as a derivative. Something happened after, around the time actually of our individual hearing, where the ex-wife went back and gave him the daughter that she kept from him. And this is something that is, a lot of people don't know. Like, people, I've had this issue a couple of times where someone would say to me, my child is now here. I want them on my application. With asylum applications, it's not always that easy because once you're put into removal proceedings, in order to get your child as a derivative on that application, the Department of Homeland Security has to exercise their discretion, issue a notice to appear in immigration court, and place that child in immigration court. And then the cases get put together. I've never successfully asked the Department of Homeland Security to put someone in removal proceedings, despite what you might be thinking right now. Like, if someone wants to face deportation and we have all these people that we can't get out of our country, why aren't we just putting them in? Again, that would be a question for the Department of Homeland Security, not for me. But I don't know. It's annoying because now I'll tell you what he has to do now for his daughter. It's not like it's the end of the world, but it's frustrating. I've had this happen where a spouse wasn't put on, and then we had to do it another way, and it's been years. That case was actually, I think, approved recently. And I just haven't had a chance to talk about it. So the past persecution here was clear. He was beaten several. Not only was he subject to discrimination and harassment, he was beaten several times to the point where he had to stay in the hospital for 10 days. He also was beaten not just in Moldova, but in Russia. So you had that stuff happen in both countries. And the reason for the beatings was on account of his religion and his ethnicity, actually. So, like I said, it was 100% because he was a Jehovah's Witness in both countries. Russia, they didn't like Moldovians, and Moldovians didn't like Russians. So he was discriminated in both countries for basically being mixed ethnicity. And once you prove past persecution, there's a rebuttable presumption that there is a fear of future persecution. So the burden shifts to the government for them to either show that there is somewhere you can internally relocate, or that country conditions have changed to the extent where it's now safe for you to return. Well, in this case, the country conditions have gotten worse for Jehovah's Witnesses in both countries. That wasn't an issue, but that sometimes is the issue. In 2017, we did the hearing in 2022, but now we're in 2024, even the record's still open. That can be a problem for people. And then, of course, he couldn't internally relocate. If he did, he couldn't practice religion. The fact is, Jehovah's Witness happens to be that they're very overt. They're out there. They're spreading their religion. That's part of what they do. That's part of the religion. So no matter where he would be, it's not legal to be that religion. He's going to continue to get persecuted. So what evidence did we submit? We had identity documents. We did country condition reports, of course. We had a really, really detailed statement from him describing everything from when he was a child to, present day, when he got, what was happening since he fled the country. A lot of times I always speak about how you have to talk about if they're still looking for you, blah, 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 blah. In this case, it wasn't necessarily relevant that someone specific was still looking for him, because he was being persecuted on account of his religion and ethnicity, which were two things that were very overt, either by hearing him speak or by looking at him doing his activities and going to Kingdom Hall and everything. So if he went back there and continued to do the same thing, even it might not be the same people that are attacking him, but the fact is it's illegal and people do not like it. So that's all you have to really show there. And like I said, it's still on the government to show that you would be safe. We also submitted the hospital discharge document for when he had the concussion for 10 days. Of course, we had to prove he's a Jehovah's Witness. So we had a letter from the Jehovah's Witness confirming his religion, I think from one of the elders. We had photos of him at Kingdom Hall, and this was the time of the Zoom meetings during COVID. So we had him on Zoom meetings with other Jehovah's Witnesses and in um, their services. We had a neurologist letter, and MRI and test results. Now, we did this for two reasons. One, to show that, to corroborate what he said. He had a concussion, and doctors, it was a bad one. And the other thing is he was still having problems. So when he got to the U.S., he went and these letters. This neurologist letter and MRI was from the U.S., and that goes towards future persecution. So there's two types of future persecution, technically, and you could have both. One is that there's a likelihood you'll be persecuted if you return, so you'll be harmed again. And it could be for the same reason or a different reason, but it has to be on account of one of those 5 grounds. Or there's something called continuing harm, which is also known as humanitarian asylum, where what happened to you was so bad that you should not have to return to your country. And that's where we look at the continued harm, that you're continuing to suffer so badly from before that it would be unreasonable to put someone back in that traumatic situation. So that's really what the head injury was for, to give us a little more oomph there, since he had it. And another letter from an elder of his congregation. This case was very testimony heavy, even though there was good evidence. At the end of the day, he testified very credibly. We had his wife there who could back up certain aspects of the story if needed. I don't believe if she testified, it was very short. And then, like I said, this was the interesting twist here. This lawyer was indicted. That's the client realized he needed to get a new lawyer. He found us. He hired us not too much before the hearing, but earlier than the one I spoke about last week. But what the problem was is that when we get to court, DHS doesn't have his file. So the judge says, well, we can't clear his background checks. Okay, well, let's go forward with the trial. And I was happy they did, because in the past they wouldn't, when background checks weren't clear before COVID times. They would just reschedule you. So, and we didn't know when that case would be over and when they'd release whatever they needed releasing, because when DHS does background checks, it's very secretive, national security issues, public safety, so we don't get to know all the details. So the judge rescheduled us. We did the whole hearing. We kind of got a feel, but the judge couldn't really tell us. Schedules us out. The date gets moved. I check with the trial attorney. I reach out before the hearing. Are the checks clear? No. We go to the hearing. They schedule us again, and I was like, so then I had another note on my calendar to contact the trial attorney, like last week or something, or the week before, and see if they were able to clear the background checks yet, because the judge said, if we get the background checks cleared before the next trial, tell me, and I'll just issue an order. Unless DHS didn't reserve to keep the record open. So yeah, they just issued the order. So I'm confusing the two cases. I did reach out to them before, but didn't hear back. That was it. So we get to court, and my client's like, I just hope that it's over. And I was like, me too. I was like, hoping that they cleared it. I don't know what to do if they don't. So it was a little nerve-wracking, but we get there, and as soon as DHS said background checks were clear, I was like, yes! And I knew what was coming next. The judge said that she was granting asylum, and DHS waived their appeal, so it's official. And that means he was granted, his wife is granted, and his younger daughter was granted. And of course, they were ecstatic. I mean, it was a very delayed gratification that they had to endure. As a tough 1.5 years for them. I know that. But thankfully, everything worked out because, this poor guy's been through a lot. And, at this point, he was really just an unfortunate victim of circumstance. So I'm really excited for him. So, what about his other daughter? That's the question, right? Well, the good news is there's options. So I told him that we had two options. We can either file what's called an I-730, which is a follow to join application. The same thing you do if a child or a spouse is outside of the country and you get granted asylum. Those are taking an obscenely long amount of time right now, and I don't know why. But essentially, they're called follow to join benefits. So you're granted their grant, like it kind of gives them the grant of asylum. They can come in if they're out of the country as an asylee, or if they're in the country, once it's approved, they become an asylee. You have to be careful if you naturalize before your child or spouse is here and becomes a permanent resident, then they can lose their asylum status or not get it. We've seen that happen before. So that's just a little caveat. But so he could do that. Or this is the other option. You can wait and file the I-130 marriage petition, not alien relative petition. Once he gets a green card, his daughter is an immediate relative. So I believe the numbers are current, but she's also under 21. So we're not, or under 18, she's not accruing unlawful presence. So we can go that route and she can get a green card that route. What will be faster? Probably the I-730, because now you're waiting at least 2 years for dad to get a green card before he even starts the process for you. And then you're hoping that there's still a visa number current. So I believe he's coming in this week, and we're going to probably do the I-730, the follow to join. So she'll be hopefully an asylee within a year or two, and then we'll apply for the green card after a year. So once you're granted asylum, you wait 1 year, and then you apply. That was I know there's a lot in that case. It's an interesting fact pattern. The main things I want to highlight: 2 nationalities or 2 citizenships. You got to prove both countries you cannot go back to. That's not an easy thing to do. It's number 1. Number 2, be honest always. If you go to a lawyer, if you have a real case, you shouldn't go to a lawyer if you don't have a real case. If you go to a lawyer and you have a real case and they're trying to push you towards what works, what they know works from your country, do what is your actual case, because you're going to get caught up in some bad stuff, and you do not want that to happen. And then what was the last thing? Oh, patience. Patience is key. Sometimes you got to wait and wait and wait and wait, and it's completely out of your control. Your lawyer, as much as she wants to do everything possible, she can only do so much. Bottom line is that patience is a virtue. And in this case, luckily, the waiting all paid off. But, I was there along the way to keep reminding them to keep their faith up, stay positive, because at the end of the day, the hard part was done. We did the testimony. It was a matter of waiting. So yeah, real interesting case. That is all for today. Don't forget to like us and follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, wherever you're watching. If you found this video to be helpful or know someone who may, hit that share button, that save button, drop us a comment, tell us what you liked. And I think this finally worked on Instagram properly. Hopefully I can keep that up. But that is all for today. Thank you for watching and have a great day. Oh, last thing. If you want to contact us, if you need an attorney or someone you know, on all 3 now, our contact information scrolling across the bottom of your screen. So feel free to reach out to us, and hopefully we can help you as well. So now, thank you for watching and have a great day.